In October 2020, a man picked up the phone and started calling his investors one by one to deliver the same message. It was over. The company he had spent 3 years building, the app he had raised $1.75 billion to launch, the idea he had convinced Disney, NBC Universal, Sony, Warner Media, and dozens of others to fund, it was shutting down. Not in a few months, not after one final attempt. Right now, the company had been live for exactly 6 months. His name was Jeffrey Katzenberg. And what makes this story genuinely insane is not that a startup failed. Startups fail every day. What makes it insane is who Jeffrey Katzenberg was, how much money he had raised, how many of the most powerful people in Hollywood and Silicon Valley had believed in him, and how completely, spectacularly, and publicly wrong every single one of them turned out to be. This is the story of Quibi, and it's the most expensive lesson in recent business history about the difference between a good idea and the right idea. To understand why Quibi's failure was so shocking, you first have to understand who Jeffrey Katzenberg was before it happened. He started his career in the mailroom at Paramount Pictures. From there, he worked his way up to president of production, not by being lucky, but by being relentless. His mentor was Michael Eisner, and when Eisner moved to Disney in 1984, he brought Katzenberg with him to run the studio. What Katzenberg did at Disney over the next decade is not a small thing. He oversaw The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King, the films that became known as the Disney Renaissance, one of the greatest creative and commercial revivals in entertainment history. During his tenure, Disney's studio revenues went from $320 million to $3.7 billion. He turned a dying animation division into the most profitable creative operation in Hollywood. Then Disney fired him, or more precisely, they refused to promote him after his direct superior died in a helicopter crash, and Katzenberg walked. He sued Disney for money he was owed. They settled out of court for an estimated $250 million. Within days of leaving, he co-founded DreamWorks with Steven Spielberg and David Geffen. The studio gave the world Shrek, Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon, franchises that are still running today. DreamWorks Animation was eventually sold to NBC Universal in 2016 for $3.8 billion. Katzenberg walked away with around $420 million. By 2017, he was 67 years old, had more money than he could spend, and had already won by any reasonable measure. He could have stopped. He didn't, because Katzenberg had spent his entire career needing to prove something to someone, first to Disney, then to Spielberg, then to the industry that had watched him leave. One former colleague would later say about Quibi, "This was supposed to be a redemption thing." In 2018, Katzenberg unveiled his next chapter, a new streaming platform called Quibi, short for Quick Bites. The idea was simple, and on paper it sounded completely logical. People were spending hours every day staring at their phones. YouTube was massive. TikTok was exploding. Clearly, people wanted short content on mobile, but what if you gave them short content that was actually premium? Hollywood-quality shows broken into episodes of 10 minutes or less, made specifically for the phone by the biggest names in the industry. He hired Meg Whitman as CEO, the former head of eBay and HP, one of the most respected executives in Silicon Valley. Together, they raised $1 billion in 2018 from a who's who list of investors: Disney, Sony, NBC Universal, Warner Media, Alibaba, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. Then, in March 2020, just weeks before launch, they raised another $750 million, total $1.75 billion before a single user had downloaded the app. To make the content, they signed everyone: Jennifer Lopez, Kevin Hart, Chrissy Teigen, Idris Elba, Steven Spielberg, Liam Hemsworth, Reese Witherspoon, the Kardashians. They committed to spending over $100,000 per minute of content, a rate that would make most streaming platforms uncomfortable. By launch, they had over 175 shows and 8,500 short-form episodes either made or in production. On April 6, 2020, Quibi went live. Everything was in place: the money, the talent, the technology, the marketing. Jeffrey Katzenberg had one of the most powerful rosters of investors and creators in entertainment history behind him. And then, almost immediately, something went wrong. Within a week of launch, Quibi had fallen out of the top 50 most downloaded apps on the iPhone. By early May, it was ranked 125th. Of the 3.5 million people who had downloaded it, only 1.3 million were actually using it. Against a target of 7 million subscribers in the first year, they had a fraction of what they needed. Katzenberg blamed the pandemic. Quibi had been designed for people on the go, commuters, travelers, people killing time between meetings. But when it launched, the entire country was locked down at home. Nobody was commuting. Nobody was in an airport. The entire behavioral context the app was built for had vanished the week it went live. There was truth in that. But the pandemic wasn't the whole story. The first problem was the phone. Quibi didn't let users share clips to social media. In 2020, that wasn't a missing feature. It was a missing engine. TikTok had exploded because every piece of content was a shareable, spreadable unit. Quibi's content sat inside the app and went nowhere. You couldn't show your friend a scene. You couldn't tweet a clip. The app was a closed room and nobody could see inside. The second problem was the television. Quibi launched as a mobile-only platform at a time when the entire world was sitting at home in front of their televisions. Netflix, Disney Plus, and HBO Max were seeing subscriber spikes. Quibi was insisting that premium content should only be watched on a 4-inch screen. It wasn't until the end, when it was already too late, that Katzenberg allowed the app to work on TVs. The third problem was the idea itself. Quibi assumed people would pay $4.99 a month for short-form content, at a moment when YouTube had infinite free short content, and TikTok had infinite free short content, and Instagram had infinite free short content. As one media analyst put it bluntly, if there was must-have content that people couldn't live without, they would have subscribed. The numbers speak for themselves. On top of all of this, a company called Echo filed a lawsuit claiming Quibi had stolen their patented mobile video technology, the same turnstile feature that let users rotate between vertical and horizontal viewing, which Katzenberg had marketed as one of Quibi's key innovations. The lawsuit became another headline the app couldn't afford. By summer, Katzenberg was exploring strategic options. He tried to sell the company to Apple, rejected. He tried Facebook, rejected. He tried Warner Media and NBC Universal, two of his own investors, also rejected. Nobody wanted it. On October 21, 2020, 198 days after Quibi launched, the Wall Street Journal broke the story. Quibi was shutting down. That same day, Katzenberg and Whitman published an open letter. "Our failure was not for lack of trying," they wrote. "We've considered and exhausted every option available to us." They acknowledged it was likely a combination of two things. Either the idea wasn't strong enough, or the timing was wrong. "Unfortunately," they wrote, "we will never know. Of the $1.75 billion raised, approximately $350 million was returned to investors. The rest, well over $1 billion, was gone. The content library, which had cost over $1 billion to produce, was eventually sold to Roku for less than $100 million. Shows that had featured the biggest stars in Hollywood were rebranded as Roku Originals and quietly dropped into a platform that nobody associated with premium content. The 200 employees lost their jobs. Dozens of projects were left in limbo. And Jeffrey Katzenberg, the man who had given the world Shrek and The Lion King, had delivered the most expensive failed launch in streaming history. So what actually killed Quibi? Not the pandemic, not the lawsuits, not the competition. Quibi died because it was a solution to a problem that had already been solved, and solved for free. By the time Quibi launched, TikTok had already figured out short mobile content. YouTube had already figured out premium creators. Netflix had already figured out subscription streaming. Quibi was trying to charge people for a format that the internet had already made free, with Hollywood names attached as if the names alone could change the economics. Katzenberg had spent 40 years being one of the most successful people in entertainment by understanding what audiences wanted before they knew they wanted it. With Quibi, for the first and only time, he understood the question but got the answer wrong. He raised $1.75 billion and hired Jennifer Lopez and Steven Spielberg, and still lost because the product didn't fit the world it launched into. That's the part no amount of money, no roster of names, and no redemption narrative can fix. Every business failure has a version of the same lesson buried inside it. The idea wasn't the problem. The assumption underneath the idea was. And the more money you raise before testing that assumption, the more expensive the lesson gets.